Hello, everybody. This is Rob Curley. I'm the editor of the Spokesman-Review in Spokane, Washington. Today, we're having another one of our virtual Northwest Passages community forums. Today, we have Spokesman-Review outdoors reporter Eli Francovich, who's been with the Spokesman-Review for about 5 years, and for the last 2.5 years, he's been our outdoors editor. And it's been a very wild 2.5 years for that guy, because it has been a whole lot more than just hunting nuances and where to go hiking and where the fish are biting, because there's been so much news over the last few years tied to the outdoor scene. And speaking of news, we have Eli in conversation today with Kelly Susewind. He is the director of Fish and Wildlife for the state of Washington. He started doing that in 2018, and I know there's going to be all sorts of interesting discussion today, so I am just going to get out of the way and let you two go. Thank you, Eli, and thank you, Kelly, for doing this.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. And hey, Kelly, thanks a lot for sitting down with us all today. How's it going for you working from home? That was sort of the first thing I wanted to ask. I like your decorations in the background.
Yeah, so it's a challenge, just like it is for everybody. It's been a crash course in technology. We have meetings going with Zoom and Teams, live stream, all kinds of stuff. So each one's a little bit different, so we're learning, but I think there'll be a lot of good come of it. We're certainly getting way more adept at managing things remotely, but it's a challenge too, because you can't just grab the person and get the answer you need.
Yeah, the whole agency's had to shift over very rapidly, haven't you all?
Yeah, we've got mandated work from home if you can, except for essential activities. We've got everybody working outside the office. Folks will come by now and then for just checking in and checking out.
Well, yeah, I wanted to ask you to kind of walk us through how that decision, how this is all unplayed from your perspective, from Fish and Wildlife's perspective, just as the virus spread, what conversations were you all having, and then walk us through those key moments of first closing Fish and Wildlife land and then restricting or closing hunting and fishing spring seasons.
Yeah, we work closely with the governor's office. That's the central point of all the information we're getting. Then we work with our local health and state health officers and start looking at options for what's going on. So on the hunting and fishing side, it really started with some razor clam digs we had coming up, which I know aren't really directly applicable on the east side, but they show that progress. It's a series of decisions and an evolving decision as you go. We had a season scheduled and started getting questions of, are you guys going to close seasons for COVID reasons? And my response was, well, no, you can go out and dig clams and stay socially distanced. It's a good, healthy outdoor activity. It's the kind of opportunity we want to provide. So doing our due diligence, we stayed connected with local health officers, state health officers. And the initial input we got was, there's no reason not to proceed with it, because you can basically follow guidelines, stay socially distanced. As we got closer to the seasons, the local health officers in particular started getting worried about local communities being inundated with too many people. We can get 10 or 20,000 people going clam digging for a tide. Ultimately, just to shorten the discussion a little bit, the Pacific County health officer issued an order forbidding razor clamming in Pacific County. So we worked with them, and obviously we're going to respect our local health officers, so we closed down the tides. Frankly, I was pretty disappointed, because I was excited not only to go, but to have that opportunity out there and have that outlet. There's a big pent-up demand. So I was pretty disappointed that we had to make the decision. I think it was the right decision given the input we had to close. And then that weekend, I saw what happened from friends that lived down there, from reports that the locals really were inundated, overwhelmed by tourists coming through just to get to the beach. There's such an increased demand right now. We're hearing from all the states that everybody's seeing 2, 3, 4 times their normal demand. Well, it was a sunny weekend on the beach, and people headed to the beach without a clam dig. It would have been far worse with a clam dig, and yet we still had people kind of overwhelming public bathrooms and flying out stores. It was, in hindsight, it was definitely a good thing to have canceled that season. And I mention it mostly because that shows the evolution. My mind was primarily focused on that initial question: can you conduct this activity individually and stay distanced? And that's the first question for sure. But just as important or more important is, what does that opening bring collectively? Can we do it in a way that doesn't concentrate people and doesn't have people traveling as well? The governor's order is pretty clear. You're supposed to stay home, and there is the exception for outdoor recreation or outdoor exercise. Check with the governor's office, and it's very clear that's intended to do that from your home. Governor himself said if you have to get in the car, you should be thinking about it. That's not what he's intending. Stay home. So those things factor into it. Then we move into the fishing seasons. The first tier of fishing seasons are those that are have endangered species requirements and or co-manager requirements. Things basically we have allocations or quotas on. We have a really robust system to do our monitoring, necessary monitoring, to show that we know how much effort's being applied, how many fish are being caught, we're staying within our quotas. Governor's very clear that recreational fishing is not an essential activity, and so we're not able to put our samplers out there to do that type of monitoring that we need to provide the information to support that activity. So those fish,
and this would be like salmon on the Columbia and
salmon on the Columbia, steelhead, salmon in Puget Sound, where we have the co-manager North of Falcon type agreements. Anywhere where we have a federal permit, co-manager agreement, a quota basically, we don't have the ability to monitor that the way we normally do. As we look forward, we're going to have to figure out ways of doing business in new ways. And so we'll see as things evolve. But because of that, we couldn't support the fishery based on our obligations, and therefore we couldn't put that fishery on. That moves us into, I'll just jump to like lakes. Lakes is a big opener, a big crowd. It's one of the biggest activities we have of the year, at least the Lowland Lake opener. So we started looking at, can we do that without concentrating people, without people traveling? A lot of people are traveling across the state for those types of fisheries. So we looked at, do we just look at the destination lakes? If you start closing those because they're potentially a problem, all that energy and demand goes to other places. And we didn't want to get in a situation where you're chasing closures. You see there's a problem. Once you see there's a problem, it's kind of too late. You've got a whole bunch of people congregated and chasing it. So ultimately we decided that for this period of time, the best approach was just to close that down in order to stay consistent with the governor's office. And it just sequentially rolls through hunting. The big first hunting issue was spring bear. So on spring bear, that's a limited entry draw hunt only. We know who has the tags and we know where they're allowed to hunt. And we looked at that data, and 90% of those folks were coming from outside the area. So the question is, do you put on a hunt where 90% of the people have to violate a governor's order in order to participate? And we decided not to open that. Spring turkey is very similar. We have about 25,000 turkey tag holders, 25,000 turkey tags. Our estimates were 70% of those folks are traveling. It's just like people are traveling to the West Coast for the razor clamps, people are traveling to the east side primarily for the turkeys. That puts, again, tens of thousands of people traveling through areas. We reached out to local health officers. We reached out to the Association of Local Health Officers, and it was overwhelmingly one-sided that please don't open stuff up that brings people in from the outside. So again, we've sequentially made those closures. The same applies to our lands. That was done consistent with the DNR and parks on a statewide effort, just seeing too much congregation in those places. For this period of time, the only weapon we have against the virus is to stay at home. Let's flatten that curve. Let's not accelerate exposure. We're hearing a lot. You can't prevent this. We agree. This is not about prevention. This is about moderation or modulation of exposure. Sorry, that's a long answer.
No, that's great. You mentioned looking at where turkey hunters were coming from as one of the data points to make this decision. What else were you looking at in terms of evidence or sort of data to indicating that this needed to happen?
Those are the big ones we look at. What's the participation? Where is the location of the activity? And where are most of the folks coming from? That's the main one. Because again, our criteria, we're going to make sure we do it in a healthy way. We want to make sure we're consistent with the governor's office, governor's orders, and that's primarily don't get people concentrated and don't get people traveling distances.
And sort of along with that, I mean, have you talked to, or did you talk to other states' fish and wildlife agencies and sort of see how they're doing it? Because I know Maine and others, for instance, have sort of gone the opposite direction with opening up fishing seasons and making it actually easier to get out?
We've certainly had communications with states. Every state's taken a little different approach. Ours is more aggressive, more restrictive. That's a fact. Every state's different. Every state's got a different population, the distribution of that human population, distribution of the resource you're trying to get to. So each state's going to do it a little differently. Each state's got a different order, or there's a few that don't have them yet, I understand. But so it's going to vary by state. In concert with checking with our health professionals and governor's office, we decided for our state this was the best approach. We've got pretty high density of folks here. We've got a lot more fishermen here than most places on a smaller footprint. That in itself doesn't drive an answer, but it's one of the factors that goes into avoiding crowds and avoiding traffic.
And going along with that, the Lewiston Tribune reported last week, I believe, that there was a proposal to allow in-county hunts. So, you know, if you lived in Spokane County, for instance, you could turkey hunt in Spokane County. Why? I mean, first of all, what do you think of that, and why didn't it? Why wasn't it an option that you went with?
Well, we looked at a lot of options, and that certainly was one of them. That first challenge is implementability. How do you really implement that? One of the first questions we got was, well, I live 5 miles from the county line and I want to hunt in the county next door. So then do you expand it to the next door county? Is the county an arbitrary border that you want to use or not use? We looked at GMUs, game management units, thinking potentially about a distance of travel. Tell people don't travel over a given radius from your home. All things we looked at. Trying to get them implemented was the first step. And the second step is, or challenge, I should say. We also look at equity, and this is something that I think we're going to have to really kind of reassess as we go forward. We did the same kind of thing on lakes. One of the big complaints I get from lakes every day is, I own lakefront property. Why can't I fish off my backyard? And the answer on this short period of time is that those fish and wildlife belong to everybody. Do we want to open an opportunity where only a select few can do that? So turkey hunting kind of falls into that range too. With those 70% of people coming from outside the area, do you want to open it for just the people who live there? The decision at the time for that time period was no. We generally, again, for a short time period, we don't want to set up an inequitable situation. I really believe that's one of the things we're looking going forward. We're going to have to readjust our standards for, is it equitable enough, or is it travel enough? All the things. It's a new world. We're going to have some new thinking on it. We made our decisions. We're accountable for those decisions in this time period. We felt the best thing was just to close it down, get through those several cycles of the life cycles of the virus, get us on the backside of that curve, and then work with folks to open responsibly.
And what do you mean, like reevaluating what's equitable and not? I didn't quite follow you on that. Could you explain that?
One of the fishing's the easy one. I own a lakefront property. I don't, but people are claiming that, hey, I own a lakefront property. I don't have to travel. I can fish off my backyard. I can do that consistent with the governor's orders, and that's, in fact, it's a case. But most people can't. Do we open a season for the state fish and wildlife where only a select few who happen to be in the right spot to be able to take advantage do that? And our decision was no, we couldn't really come up with an equitable way of doing that. I think as we move forward, we're going to have to make some decisions that things aren't perfect. And one of the imperfections might be, hey, there is a different equitable. Some people are going to have more access than others. Up till now, for the short period of time, we decided let's stick with making it equitable as we can to everybody. In the future, I think that the bar of we're equitable enough may change.
And that's as we continue to deal with the fallout of the coronavirus, that's what you're pointing to, that regulations and rules might change where it's not quite a blanket closure.
Yeah, I mean, we recognize this is a blunt tool. We made the decision consciously to use that tool, but we're also wanting to get out of this as quickly as we can, as long as we can do it and stay consistent with governor's directives, and we can do it in a safe manner. And we're going to have to get more creative and more accepting of little problematic issues in order to get to the broader. We want people out on the water. We want people in the woods. We want them to do it in a responsible way, especially if they can do it without travel. So one of the things we're hearing a lot, we reached out, had a meeting with about 35 representatives of different organizations this week, hunting organizations, fishing organizations, guides, charters, hiking groups, help us figure out how to reopen this. And one of the big things we hear from those groups is open it in a way where the locals can participate. We don't want people traveling across the state, but figure out how to open it up locally. So that's one of the top tier issues for how we get out of this on the back end.
And that actually brings us nicely to a viewer question from Matt Mimnaugh at the Inland Northwest Wildlife Council. And he asks, could a soft start to fishing and early hunting / turkey spring bear seasons be possible for the individuals who have already purchased and drawn special permits?
Yeah, that's one of the things we're looking at. How do we reopen the outdoors? And there's arguments on both sides. One says open softly in just select areas, which brings a concentrated group of people, maybe not so much on a limited entry issue, and certainly that is helpful. The other says, no, when you open it, you want to open it pretty widely to distribute people across the landscape. So we're looking at a number of ways to try to open this. We're committed to trying to open it as soon as we can, and we're committed to trying to give enough notice for people to be able to be ready when it opens. We've also got to be ready on our end too. We've got to be able to get our staff out there. We've got lands that haven't been maintained or haven't been open for a while. We got to get our guys out there, get those things ready, get bathrooms open and stocked and all that. So we'll be trying to give people enough notice that they can actually go out and enjoy what we have to offer.
This whole entire conversation is, I think that the premise of it's kind of hard for a lot of anglers and hunters to stomach, that being that these aren't essential activities, whereas other things like pot shops or whatever you choose are allowed still. I mean, why is that, if from your perspective? Why were these deemed non-essential? And I know that's it's not your decision quite.
Yeah, it's not, and I don't know a lot about those other activities. But they were in the governor's orders. Those were deemed essential activities. I don't know if there are destination pot shops. I honestly do not know. But I know there's destination hunting and fishing and congregating there. I also ask myself, as an individual and as a public employee, am I going to implement and support the governor's orders? And certainly as a public employee, I'm going to do that. And that means the intent and spirit of those orders as well. So I'm not looking at the orders and saying, hey, where are congregations occurring? What's the weakest part of the order? And that's my bar for my decision making. So I'll let the governor talk about, or the governor's staff talk about those other issues. For us, we're taking it in the spirit and intent, which is don't travel, don't congregate.
You mentioned Fish and Wildlife lands, needing to be reopened, and I've heard anecdotal reports of, increased vandalism. Are you seeing that? What are you seeing out? What are your enforcement officers seeing out on the land right now?
Well, our enforcement officers are out on the land, and they are seeing some vandalism, signs, kiosks, etc. We're also working with our sister agencies, the NR and Parks, and we're also seeing vandalism, locks being cut. We're trying to get some more eyes on the ground just to make sure we aren't creating unsafe conditions, given that we're not out there all the time like we normally are. We are seeing some vandalism. I cannot quantify it at this point in time, but definitely are seeing it.
And then what sort of long-term impacts do you anticipate this, the closures and whatnot, having on the agency, whether that's, public reputation, budget, or both probably?
Well, both. I mean, we are taking a lot of hits. The reputation of the agency is at a low because of these closures. Recognize that. Hopefully we can get through this to the other side. Have people know that we are trying to get folks out there to maintain these opportunities. We're trying to do it in a way where we're looking at the big picture first, which is community health. We're definitely taking some budget hits. This is normally a big time of the year for us on selling licenses, with the new licensure starting in April. We're seeing dramatic declines in that. Also, I worry long-term that this is the beginning of a recession, depression. I'll leave it to the economists to say what, but state general fund, just available funds are going to impact us in the long term. I think our whole world's going to be different. Even when we recover from this COVID, the new normal is not going to be the old normal, and that's going to include a much tighter budget for everybody, including us.
And then, I think that we maybe should have asked this up front, but how likely is it for, fishing and hunting, the kind of later end of turkey season, to open on May 4th? Are you can you say now what's gonna happen then?
I can't say with certainty what's going to happen. I can say with certainty we're working hard to figure out how can we open up, what can we open, how can we open it, how can we do it in a responsible manner. That was the meeting we had with external stakeholders this week. I can say with certainty we're looking for options and opportunities, and this is an evolving situation. So I'm very hopeful I can say we will get things opened up as soon as we can. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but we've got a couple of teams working on it.
And do you think it's likely that big game seasons are impacted in the fall?
I'm really hopeful they're not. That's kind of that new normal. That's where I'm concerned about big game seasons. I think we're on the backside of the curve by that time. Hopefully, we're into our new normal, whatever that looks like. So I don't think broadly they'll be impacted like they are right now. I also hope we're able to use more surgical tools at that time. But what we're hearing from the healthcare professionals is we're going to have to learn to live with this virus for a long time. It's going to be a while before we have a vaccine or actually free of this. And so what I worry about for big game is, are we going to have hotspots? Hopefully we'll have better testing, tracing, et cetera. And if we have an impact, it would be that we have a hotspot in an area where we have a season plan. It won't be the blunter tool across the state. It would be surgical. And hopefully we'll be behind the curve and won't have to do that either. But that's right now our hope is fall seasons will be as they normally are. Our hunting pamphlet will be coming out next week. Our draws for select entry permits will be done in May, just like always. We're proceeding ahead with anticipating providing the normal level of opportunity, with the caveat we'll have to see where we're at with COVID at that time.
And have you seen any increases in, other outdoor activity that you all might track other than fishing and hunting? I know that's the easiest one to monitor with license sales and whatnot.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing, you can see folks out there a lot. We're talking to other states as well. I think everybody, again, varying degrees of closure or non-closure, everybody's seeing an increase in basically all outdoor activities. So folks are staying at home relative to work, but there's this pent-up demand. It's not only the cabin fever you get going through the winter wanting to get out, and now it's nice weather, but nice weather now with COVID, there's this huge demand to get out there. So we're seeing increased all outdoor activities. I think from all states, we're seeing a huge increase in participation. That's part of the challenge.
And here's another viewer question from Howard Graham. Quote, I expect poaching to increase. What impact will this have on your law enforcement plans and officers?
Our law enforcement are essential. They're out there doing their normal work, but yeah, we will have to be attentive to additional poaching. I can't speculate where we might or might not see it, but we'll have to, especially once we get our biologists back in doing their normal research, paying attention to any impacts on populations.
But you don't know exactly now whether you haven't heard reports of poaching or increased poaching.
I haven't heard reports of increased poaching. If we get reports, we'll handle them through our enforcement group like we normally do.
And then, so in terms of agency staff, enforcement officers are out, but pretty much everyone else is working from home, right?
Pretty much. We are trying to maintain, so under our essential functions, we have the essential activities, I'll call them, that the governor defined. Then we have our continuity of operations plan, COOP, our bureaucratic name for how do we work in emergency situations like earthquakes, like pandemics. For us, one of our essential activities is animal husbandry. So we've got our hatchery folks are still working. We're trying to mark fish because that's part of maintaining our authority to be able to do things. So we've got some activities. Those are the big ones: hatcheries, mark fish, enforcement, that are essential activities. We are expanding that a little bit to get folks out. So if we've got an endangered species that needs some type of work right now, we're making a priority decision. Can it wait a few weeks? If it can, it's waiting. If it can't, if we're really at this point where if we don't do something in the next couple of weeks, we risk blinking out a population, those are essential activities. We've got those folks going out, but it's extremely limited to just those types of activities.
What examples of key species that need to be worked on right now? Do you have any examples off the top of your head?
Well, like well, steelhead for one, especially endangered steelhead. We were not having folks going out. We thought for a couple of weeks, when the first 2 weeks or so closure was going on, that we would do without some stream surveys and smolt out migration surveys. Now that we're extended through May, that's the time we have to collect that information so we know how to manage that group so they don't go. We don't have a problem in future years. Sage grouse might be another place where we need to get out. There's a time limit. We first ask, can it wait? If it can't wait, and we're actually risking losing a species or being able to provide the conservation element of our mission, then we're sending folks out.
And then just sort of generally, what would you say to people that, you know, there's been calls sort of to boycott Fish and Wildlife, that, you know, a lot of anger has come up around this, as you know, of course. What would you say to that, just generally?
I would say generally, I understand the frustration. I understand people wanting to get out. I know there's some conflicting information out there, and it seems odd that people can do certain things and not others. I would just say know that we're making decisions in concert with local health officials, state health officials, and we're working hard to get back out there. We're going to be here on the backside of this pandemic, and we'll be working hard to provide those opportunities. Right now, we're making decisions based on that input from the governor's office and health professionals on what's best for the collective community health.
My final question, Kelly, what does your day look like now? I know that, you know, a lot of your job is meeting with people. You travel quite a lot during a normal year. So what are you doing now?
Doing a lot of this, meeting remotely. Again, having a crash course on latest technology for doing remote meetings. We just finished our North of Falcon. That was all done remotely for the first time. That was an added challenge, negotiating with large groups of people remotely. So right now I'm basically on the computer all day, or I will come into the office occasionally just when I need to be here. Again, socially distanced from other folks. It's a pretty empty building right now. So days have actually gotten longer, but they're not on the road and they're not in the office.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time.
Sure, thank you, Eli.
Yes, Kelly, for doing this. And I hope as this story develops, I would love to have you guys talk again. It's been really illuminating. Really, hearing how decisions are made makes them a lot easier to understand. So I thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to come back. It's as I said, it's evolving. Every day is a little different than the day before, and so coming back in the future and giving an update would be great.
And you guys stay safe out there, okay?
Thanks.
Well, thank you.